So welcome to Science 6. This is our open house. I am Miss Kim Chandani.
I am Heather Dewar.
And I'm Nathan Harvey, and we are your sixth grade science teachers. As far as this year, we're currently in our fifth unit. We have 6 units this year. We're in our fifth unit. We've studied 4 other units. We looked at matter, energy, force and motion, and then space in the solar system was our last unit. Our unit 5 is Earth, we're currently in, and then our unit 6 is going to be organisms and the environment.
And some important dates to remember, March 12th, we have a quiz on plate boundaries, which is also the end of quarter 3 and right before spring break. March 15th through the 19th is our spring break, and April 7th will be our unit 5 Earth test.
So we're just going to give you a brief overview of all of our different units of study and some of the student work that we have seen this year.
So we started the year with Unit 1, which was over matter, and some of this was online, but some of this was in person if your student chose to be in person as well. And no matter where they were, whatever their modality was, they were working on the same things, and we wanted to make sure that we ensured that they're all making sure they know the content and that they're getting the same experiences regardless of where they are. So if you look at the student work that we've kind of attached here, we have looks like a little worksheet that was over density, where we learned the density formula, and then they calculated the density and had to determine whether those 3 objects there would sink or float in whatever the other liquids were. And then we have metals, nonmetals, and metalloids, which was something that we studied, and they did a little sorting activity, whether they determined whether it was a metal, nonmetal, or metalloid, and then sorted it out. And that was done in numbers. We do use numbers, I'd say a good amount. And that was one of our first numbers files that we worked in. And then they also made some observations on some labs. We did some chemistry, and we made some observations, wrote down some evidence of stuff that we were seeing in order to determine whether it was a chemical change or a physical change. And then in Unit 2, that was over energy. And so we looked at topics like energy transformations, heat transfer, that'd be conduction, convection, and radiation. We looked at potential and kinetic energy, and then renewable and non-renewable energy resources. And this one was really cool because we got to look at it kind of in everyday life. You see that the first picture at the top left, the electrical to thermal. So they went around in the real world or in this classroom or in this school and found examples of an electrical to thermal energy conversion, and then they wrote why and explained what was happening. The bottom left, we had a cool gizmo where we were looking at potential and kinetic energy and the transfer between those. There's a cool little skateboard, or we could make him go over ramps. We could make him do loops and flips and stuff. So that was pretty interesting and fun. We had conduction, convection, and radiation when you look at the picture on the top right, and those are making sure they know the different types of heat transfer and a real world example of where they would see that and where they would encounter that. And then the bottom right, the renewable and non-renewable, they learned about an energy resource, like for example, solar energy here, and they had to answer some questions about it, look up some information, do some quality research about what this energy resource is and how it works.
And Unit 3 is our force and motion unit. We talked about balanced and unbalanced forces, which is that top left picture. That was one of our gizmos, which is our interactive lab simulations that we are able to do. And then we went to graphing motion. They had to find the motion of the item, and then they had to graph it and determine what was happening, if it was speeding up or slowing down. Then they also had to calculate that speed. And then the last part was the inclined planes, and determined what plane was going to apply the most force and be easier to go up or down. And that bottom picture was our gizmo as well. And then our next unit was our space unit, which I think they enjoyed probably the most. And we did a gravity, which was this first gizmo, and they had to determine that gravity ruled our universe and our solar system. And then we talked about, did some inner and outer planet investigation, and they had to determine the inner planet characteristics and the outer planet characteristics, and in numbers they had to sort those as well. And then they learned a little bit about space exploration and kind of had to do a little bit of research on that as well, and then put some information in order on a timeline.
Our current unit is Unit 5, which is Earth. So we are just into the very beginning of this. We started with Earth's layers, which you see on our doodle notes over here that are colored. And then right now we have moved into plate boundaries. So students are looking how major plates are moving around the Earth and how it's changing. And we will move on. They're currently in a numbers file, which you see the puzzle pieces at the bottom. They will show kind of what they've learned about each different boundary. After that, when we come back in April, we are going to move on to Unit 6, which is our organisms and environment unit. So in this unit, this is where students are really introduced to life science, and we start learning about just the basic building blocks of life. And then we learn about the organization all the way up to an ecosystem and to the taxonomy of domains. So some assessments that are going to be happening within that unit, we'll have a cells quiz, we'll have a quiz on characteristics of organisms, and then we'll have a quiz on biotic and abiotic. These are our 3 high priorities for this unit. And then of course we will end with our test, which will be a 2-part test like all of our tests, the first part being vocabulary and the second part being a multiple choice over the content. And then we just want to remind you that vocabulary we've been hitting really hard this year. At the very beginning of every unit, we have done a pre-assessment, so they will do that in Unit 6. And then throughout, we do a vocabulary warm-up every single day to make sure that the kids are seeing those words and using them regularly. And then at the very end, the part 1 of their test will be their vocabulary test. So you also can see that these are some of our topics that we'll go over during Unit 6. This is one of our largest. So we'll go over cells, characteristics of organisms, biotic and abiotic, prokaryotes and eukaryotes, taxonomy, focusing really on the domains, and then ecosystems levels of organizations. In the bottom left, you'll see those are our emails. If you have any questions, we hope that you will reach out to us. As always, we will try to get back to you as soon as possible. And just let us know if you have any questions for us.